The Widow Episode 18. Rain poured down on the city, as heavy as the pain that still burned in Laura's heart. A year after the death of her beloved Ricardo, she finally allowed a shy, hesitant smile to touch her lips. Daniel, a kind and mysterious man, was slowly winning her over, breaking down the wall of ice she had built around her broken heart. But Laura's happiness was a secret that needed to be kept under lock and key. Because someone was watching, lurking in the shadows, their eyes full of hatred and vengeance, and that someone wouldn't hesitate to destroy everything to possess what they had always desired. What will happen? The rain beat hard against the windows of Laura's apartment, as if trying to enter and wash away all the sadness that still remained in her heart. A year since Ricardo, her beloved Ricardo, had passed away. A year of loneliness, of silent tears, and of a heart closed to any other possibility of love. She had promised herself with all her might that she would never again make room for a new love, that her heart would never belong to another man. But then Daniel arrived. Like a ray of sunshine on a gray, rainy day, he invaded her life, gentle, attentive, persistent. He looked at her with an affection that slowly melted the thick layer of ice Lavra had built around her wounded heart. And for the first time in a long time, Lavra felt the sweet taste of happiness. A shy, hesitant smile at first now bloomed on her lips more frequently. She smiled at Daniel, and in her eyes shone something she thought was lost forever: hope. Daniel was different from all the other men who had approached her. He didn't pressure her, didn't try to force her to forget Ricardo. He respected her, admired her, and above all, loved her with a sweetness that made her vulnerable, as if a piece of her old protective shield had come loose. They met in secret, in romantic and discreet places, savoring the beauty of a love that was reborn, shy, but strong as a tree that resists the storm. But Laura's happiness was a dangerous secret, a secret that needed to be kept under lock and key. Someone was watching every meeting, every exchanged glance, every gesture of affection. It was Alberto, Ricardo's brother, who harbored a secret, silent, an unhealthy love for Lavra, a love that had never been reciprocated, a love transformed into corrosive hatred at the sight of the woman he had always loved in another man's arms. Alberto felt betrayed, wronged, and planned his revenge with coldness, meticulousness, as if building a house of cards on top of a deep abyss. He followed her through the dark streets of the city, hidden in the shadows, watching her from afar. His eyes shone with a mixture of desire and anger as he clenched his fist, his fingers white with the force of the hatred that consumed him. Alberto had a plan, a dark and meticulously crafted plan to separate Lavra and Daniel, a plan that could be very costly. He knew Laura's weaknesses, her insecurities, her fear of being hurt again. He was ready to use them against her, ready to play dirty, to manipulate, to destroy the happiness she had found. The rain continued to fall, heavy and incessant, a perfect setting for the drama unfolding in the city streets. Lavra and Daniel walked arm in arm, unaware of the approaching danger. Laura's lips curved into a smile, her eyes shone with the passion that was reborn. She was in love, completely surrendered to Daniel's affection, and for a moment the pain of losing Ricardo seemed to lessen. But Alberto watched them from inside his car, hidden, his fists clenched. He would not allow Lavra to find happiness. He would not allow her to love another man. Alberto's shadow was long and sinister, stretching across the wet asphalt. He started the engine, the car's lights cutting through the darkness of the night. His mind raced, devising the next step of his evil plan. The rain fell like tears from a weeping sky, a silent witness to the impending tragedy. What will happen? Would Laura's newly discovered happiness be safe against the fury of a heart wounded by jealousy and loss? The threat was real, imminent, silent, but deadly, like a snake hidden in the tall grass, ready to strike. Lavra and Daniel, immersed in their love, did not realize that a storm even stronger than the rain was about to break over their lives. The lovers' fate now hung by a thread, a thin and fragile thread, at the mercy of Alberto's implacable and vengeful will. And the cold, dark night promised moments of great tension. The rain showed no mercy, each drop echoing the loneliness that still haunted Lavra, even with the warmth of Daniel's embrace. He was a safe harbor in the midst of the storm, a ray of sunshine that warmed her frozen soul. But the memory of Ricardo, still alive and painful, mingled with the sweet sensation of a new love. creating a complex web of emotions within her. She loved him, yes, she loved Daniel with an intensity that frightened her and filled her with joy at the same time. But fear, the ghost of the past, haunted her. And Daniel's gaze, so full of love, sometimes carried with it an echo of guilt. Daniel perceived Laura's fragility, the inner struggle she was waging. He didn't pressure her, knowing that time was the best remedy to heal the deep wounds of the past. He loved her patiently, respectfully, with a sweetness that Laura never imagined finding again. He won her over with simple gestures, with affectionate words, with the tenderness of his gaze. But he also felt the presence of the shadow, the weight of a secret that hung over them like a constant threat. He felt Laura's breathless gasp when a car sped past them. The sudden memory of Ricardo caused Laura to tremble, causing her to pull away from Daniel for a few moments. Alberto's obsession grew every day. He followed Laura, spied on her, turning her life into a hell of constant surveillance. His hatred was a monster that devoured his soul, feeding it with the image of Lava in another man's arms. He spent hours analyzing photos, studying her schedules, planning every step of his revenge. With each furtive meeting between Lava and Daniel, the poison of jealousy corroded Alberto's heart, transforming him into a dark and dangerous figure, a specter in the shadows. He not only watched, but also initiated a psychological game with Lavra, sending anonymous flowers, enigmatic letters, and disturbing messages that left Lavra in a state of alert and fear. In one of these clandestine meetings in the silence of a deserted park, Daniel noticed that something was wrong. Lavra was restless, distracted, looking in all directions with a fear she couldn't disguise. He realized that someone was watching them and tried to calm her, but terror had already settled in Laura's heart. Alberto had succeeded in his goal, to plant the seed of fear, the seed of doubt. The scene was charged with tension. The love between them was a fragile thread of hope in the midst of the storm. In an act of bravery, Daniel decided to confront Alberto. He knew it was a risk, that it could put Lavar in danger, but he couldn't stand idly by in the face of the threat hanging over them. He followed Alberto to a deserted place, determined to put an end to the persecution. He confronted him. The words came out like projectiles, accusing him of his obsessive pursuit. Alberto, in turn, confirmed his obsession and revealed his unhealthy feelings for Lava, showing his hatred and desire for revenge. The fight was inevitable, a physical and psychological clash between love and hate in a rainy and desolate setting. The rain intensified, witnessing the force of passion and revenge, on one side, desperate love, and on the other, visceral hatred. Daniel did not flinch, but Alberto was strong and determined. What would result from this confrontation? The victory of love or the triumph of hate? The answer was about to be revealed. The dark and rainy night hid a secret that would soon be revealed. Lavra, in the distance, witnessed everything, hidden, helpless. The suspense was unbearable. The rain poured down in torrents, each drop a small hammer striking the asphalt. Lavra, hidden behind an old, rusty car, watched the fight between Daniel and Alberto. Lightning cut through the dark night, illuminating the brutal scene for a moment. Daniel, the man who had melted the ice in her heart, was fighting Alberto, the ghost of the past, the shadow of hatred. Fists collided, a muffled sound echoing in the silence of the night. Lavra felt a tightness in her chest, a mixture of fear and anguish that suffocated her. She would scream, beg them to stop, but her voice was lost in the fury of the storm. With each punch, each fall, the image of Ricardo, her deceased husband, overlaid the events like a ghost that haunted her. Both men were drenched, covered in mud and blood. Alberto, driven by a morbid love and the loss of his brother, fought with tremendous strength, fueled by revenge. Daniel, in turn, was defending not only his love for Lavara, but his own life. He felt the weight of a newly discovered love, a love that promised a happy future, but which was now threatened by Alberto's blind fury. The fight was a whirlwind of blows, kicks, and a fierce hissing that broke the silence of the night. Daniel's body was lean and agile, while Alberto's robust and strong body made him an implacable opponent. Suddenly, Alberto threw Daniel against a tree. The tree trunk cracked under the impact, and a groan of pain escaped Daniel's lips. Alberto approached, his face contorted with rage, ready to deliver the final blow. Lavra, gripped by fear and helplessness, closed her eyes. She felt a chill run down her spine, a terrible feeling that everything was about to end. A year of mourning, the reconstruction of her life, the new love, everything about to be destroyed. But then something unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, strong man who positioned himself between Alberto and Daniel. It was Rodrigo, a friend of Ricardo and a former detective, who was investigating some shady dealings of his deceased friend's brother. He had been following Alberto from afar and knew of the hatred he harbored for Lavra. The surprise was evident on Alberto's face. He hadn't expected interference. Rodrigo was agile and precise, delivering accurate blows, disarming Alberto. The fight was quick and tense, but Rodrigo managed to subdue Alberto, arresting him. The violence ceased. The force of hatred was broken by the force of justice. As the rain continued to fall, Rodrigo arrested Alberto, who struggled, furious and powerless. Lavra emerged from her hiding place, running to Daniel, who was injured but alive. She hugged him, sobbing, a cry of relief, of overcome terror, of a love that could finally breathe freely. Daniel, with an aching body and a pounding heart, returned the hug, murmuring words of comfort and gratitude amidst the sobs. The happiness, which had been threatened, now seemed stronger, more precious than ever. Rodrigo's arrival had been like a divine intervention, a guardian angel who had saved them from the clutches of hatred. The night, previously dark and threatening, now gave way to a new dawn. A dawn that promised the continuation of a love that had faced a great storm and emerged victorious. The rain, which had witnessed the fight, now seemed to wash them, purify them, preparing the way for a new stage in their lives, a stage where happiness could finally flourish free from shadows and threats. The tragedy was averted, love had prevailed, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. Alberto's shadow remained, the memory of danger, a harbinger that the battle for happiness was not yet completely over. The rain finally subsided, leaving behind the shiny, slippery asphalt, as if nature itself had celebrated the end of the fight. Lavra hugged Daniel tightly, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against hers. Fear still echoed in her bones, but the joy of having him alive, the security in his arms, was a greater force. Laura's crying mingled with Daniel's muffled groan of pain, while Rodrigo handcuffed Alberto, who still cursed and uttered threats between clenched teeth. Defeated but not conquered, the image of Alberto, subdued, did not bring the expected peace. Something in his eyes, a cold, calculating gleam, indicated that the fight was not yet over. The ambulance arrived, the sirens cutting through the night silence that now seemed heavier, more laden than before. As Daniel was carried away on a stretcher, Lavra noticed something in his pocket, a small piece of paper, carefully folded. She took it out, her fingers trembling. It was a photograph, a picture of her and Ricardo, smiling on a sunny day at a beach. On the back, a handwritten message. "You will never forget me. I will always be here." The handwriting was familiar. Lavra recognized the script. It wasn't Alberto's handwriting. It was an elegant script, almost feminine. A chill ran down her spine. She looked at Rodrigo, who watched the scene seriously, and handed him the photograph without saying a word. Rodrigo's gaze became intense, a gaze that carried within it the weight of discovery, a sudden and terrifying understanding. He knew that handwriting, and thinking about Ricardo's past, he knew exactly who it could be. The ambulance drove away, its red lights disappearing into the light rain. Lavra stood there, still, amidst the darkness that now seemed more oppressive. She still held the piece of paper that could completely change everything she knew, or thought she knew. The image of Ricardo, a man she believed she knew deeply, was now jumbled with a poignant doubt. He carried a secret, a dark secret that haunted her even in death. Who was the woman who wrote on that photo? What was her connection to Ricardo? And, more importantly, what did that secret have to do with her? The rain had stopped falling, and the cold of the night intensified as Lavra perceived the darkness that settled in her heart. Would the discovery of Ricardo's secret bring light or shadow? Would the conquered happiness be at risk again? And what would Daniel do when he found out everything? The answer would be lost in the night.